module, I'm going to talk a little bit about business process management methodology and how the tools of a business process management system align to that methodology and how these things also differ. If you recall in the first presentation or video, I talked a little bit about process chaos and typical process situation where work and information is moving around and there really isn't a very streamlined approach to that process. Business process management methodology, or BPM methodology, really facilitates formalizing the process and then improving and controlling the process. The methodology follows the life cycle that you see here on the screen. So first we design the process, then we model the process. And modeling the process is really doing what-if analysis. What if we had more people in the first step? Could we process more items, or is that just going to cause a bottleneck downstream? So modeling really is more about performing analysis on the process. Once I understand and define, design, and model the process, then execution really is performing the process, doing it. And then while you're doing it, the ability to then monitor that process and track and see how that process is performing, and then ultimately using the input from that monitoring and the metrics to ultimately go back and optimize the process and look for areas where maybe there are bottlenecks or other ways that you can refine and improve the process. So the method takes us from this more chaotic process to a much more structured and streamlined and well understood process. And again, the optimal word here is to manage processes. And if you look at manage and the definition of manage, it's to be in charge, to administer, to run, to regulate, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to basically administer, run, control our business processes. The other point I want to make here is that business process management methodology doesn't necessarily mean we have to use software to accomplish it. We can simply document and refine a business process and how that process should be performed without involving technology to do that. So where then does business process management software or systems fit in? Well, once we design a process, we can then apply technology to help enforce that process. So we take that now formalized and well understood process and we apply technology. And if you recall, I talked about the heart of a business process management system is workflow. So we can define rules and who needs to perform work and how long it should take them to perform that work in that core engine, and literally route work, documents, forms, information between people and between the business systems where we might need to store that information and retrieve that information from. So the business process management system acts as somewhat of a broker in terms of controlling and managing that work and movement of information. In addition to doing that, it also then can provide visibility so you can track where something is, and it provides metrics because it's keeping track of all of this information through an automatic or electronic mechanism. I want to take this life cycle now, this DMEMO life cycle, or design, modeling, execution, monitoring, and optimization life cycle, and apply it to a business process management tool set, or basically the tools that BizFlow offers. Before I do that, I want to just talk about a few key terms that I'm likely going to use as we discuss various topics throughout the entire course. As is process really basically means what is the current state of the process today. And generally, in a business process management methodology, the very first thing you do is you flow out or document the current as-is process. The to-be process is the state of the process the way you want it ultimately to be performed in the future. And generally, you lean out or you take out inefficiencies in the process, you look for ways to optimize it, and that ultimately becomes your to-be process. Structured process is really about a well-defined set of steps that are highly repeatable. A lot of times in processes, very specific things occur in a very specific order, and they're highly repeatable. However, in a lot of processes, there are those situations like I might be handling an appeals case. And the first step is always to define or document the case. And so we input the case. And the next step, based on the kind of case, might be for someone to review and analyze that case. But then there might be a situation where, based on the type of case, after I review and analyze it, maybe any number of 6 or 7 or 10 things might have to occur. And it's not highly repeatable. It's unknown how exactly that case is going to be resolved, but we still want to control and manage it. And that's called unstructured process. So we still want to have some control over what we're doing, but we don't want to be so rigid in that we're not going to allow knowledge workers to do what they need to do to get work done based on their knowledge and understanding of what needs to happen. A work list is an inbox of work assigned to you, like your to-do list. So just like an email inbox has an inbox of things that are messages that are coming to you, a work list is just an electronic list of those things that are assigned to you. And a work item then is one individual one of those items in your work list. Maybe you're assigned to review a document, or to approve an expense report, or to input a case. These would be work items. So again, kind of following this DeMemo life cycle or set of phases, in the first phase we design the process. BizFlow has a process modeling tool. It's called the BizFlow Process Modeler, and the tool is a drag and drop visual flowcharting tool. It lets you design a flowchart like the one that you see on the screen, and it allows you to document as is and to be process flows. So it allows us to basically design and or document a business process. As part of design, when you're going to automate a process, and with BizFlow that's really the end goal, one of the other tools that BizFlow offers is a forms creation tool. It's called BizFlow WebMaker Forms, and it allows us to create input screens. At each one of these steps in the flow, when there's human activities, and that's indicated by the little human icon on our flowchart map, we're expecting a person to perform some task at this step. And when the workflow engine reaches that step and it delivers the work item to the person and they click on it, they're going to see some type of form, and they're either going to input information to that form or they're going to be reviewing information that was input in a previous step. Again, part of design in the case of automation would be to also design the screens or forms that are occurring throughout the process. In terms of modeling, the one distinction between a process flowchart or a process diagram and a process model is the fact that a process model, like BizFlow's Process Modeler, stores data along with the picture. When you double click on one of these icons in the process flow diagram or map, you can add attributes or data to that given step in the flow. Some of that data is used for the purpose of routing information, like assignments and who's going to perform this work and which form should show up when I reach this step in the process. But in addition to that, it's information like what you see on the screen: expected waiting time, expected working time, which then can calculate or project planned starting time and planned completion times. So as we talked about, or as I mentioned earlier, you can do what-if analysis. So in this case, if I were to put the expected waiting time and the expected working time on each step in the flow, I could then calculate how long is it going to take then to get to the 8th step in the process, and when can I expect this to get completed. So then I can benchmark the process and say this process should take 8 days. So now I can measure myself against that benchmark. In terms of execution, again, because we're dealing with automation now at this point, execution really means just do it. But in this case, we're automating a process. So with a business process management tool like BizFlow, once we've designed the process and we've modeled it, we've input all of the information about who's doing what and when and what forms we're going to use, and we've added things like deadlines and routing rules, and maybe integration points into the model, the designer of the process, usually somebody in the IT organization or a technical business analyst, is going to then publish that process along with all of its assets or project components and push them or publish them to a server. And from that server then, the end user community, the business users, will log into a web page and they would see a screen similar to the one that you see here. And the process, in this case, if it were a travel request, they would be able to go to the Start New tab and select the travel request, and they could view the flow diagram for that travel request, or they could initiate or start the workflow for that travel request. And then that would bring up a form like we saw before. They would fill out or complete that form, and then once that form gets submitted, that then would create a work item in the work list of the person who's going to approve this travel request. That person in turn could then click on that approval, and that would pop open a form, and I could then approve this item and move it to the next step or next queue in the process. BizFlow has then therefore a web client or a web portal where people can access work, as well as has the ability to integrate to or allow people to access work through their cell phone or smart devices, as well as email. So you can be delivered an item to approve, for example, on your mobile device, on your phone, and in the same way that I can click on an item in a web browser, I can do the same thing on a mobile device. Or I may get an email notification sent to me that I have some work to perform, and I would open that email, click on a link, and that could then in turn launch a form that I may need to interact with. And of course I'm talking about BizFlow in the context of a lot of human-centric activities, but BizFlow can also, of course, complete work and update a CRM system or a database of some type, or interact with other business systems as a step in the workflow. BizFlow also has monitoring tools, and there's really two levels of monitoring. What you see here on the screen is metrics, aggregated data about processes. For example, we can look at how many travel requests were processed in a period, how long it took to process those travel requests, and other types of metrics and data about the process, as well as the business data. In addition to more aggregate level monitoring and reporting, there's also workflow level monitoring. So we can monitor a given process and check on its state. Well, if I wanted to know where my travel request was, I could go to a BizFlow monitor and I can see exactly where the status of that item is. Once we then have those metrics and information about how the process is being performed, now that we've automated it and put it into a workflow system, we can now utilize that to help us further optimize that process. So now if we can identify where there are bottlenecks or other problems in the process, we can then refine it and continually improve and adapt the process as needed. We would go back in, make changes to the map, changes to the rules, republish it, and perform that process in that newly defined, optimized way. So to kind of recap the components, perhaps from a slightly different perspective, BizFlow has two types of clients that are used. The BizFlow Process Studio, which is used by designers. And this is a client-side software. It's something that you would install on your laptop or your local computer and launch it locally. And then it does connect to a server where it's storing your process models and forms and other information. And under that studio are two tools that get launched as part of that studio. One is the BizFlow Process Modeler, and one is BizFlow WebMaker. And then the other type of client that interacts with BizFlow is what the end user community will use, your employees, managers, executives will log in through a browser, so they'll use Internet Explorer or Firefox, and interact with the BizFlow web client. And this is where they would access their task list, where they would be able to monitor work in progress, where they would be able to access reports, and where you could also perform administration of the system, like adding users or changing a user's profile and other types of administration of the system. In addition to the clients, there's a server, and I'm not going to get into too much of the technical aspects of this, but it's a N-tier architecture, meaning each of these modules, the web application, BizFlow application server, and data repository, can be either in a single physical server or split or deployed on virtual servers. And as you can see, there's a workflow repository, and this is where all of the workflow related information is being stored. And there's also a file repository. So as documents might be attached, for example, I might attach scanned receipts to an expense process. That would all be stored in a file repository. And then of course BizFlow has adapters that allows it to communicate or interact with other business systems. If I needed to pull information into a form from, let's say, a Salesforce system or a PeopleSoft system, I could use adapters to communicate with those systems to both pull information in to BizFlow and then push information back out to those other systems.